The courtroom lights blazed with an intensity that seemed to burn through the camera lenses, casting sharp shadows across Judge Judy Shandlin's face as she sat motionless at her bench, her fingers drumming a silent rhythm on a leather-bound book that would soon become the weapon of mass destruction in what reporters would later call the Constitutional Massacre of 2023. The air was electric, crackling with a tension so thick you could taste it. As Karen Mitchell stood at the plaintiff's podium, her designer blazer perfectly pressed, her highlighted hair cascading over shoulders that radiated the kind of confidence that comes from years of getting exactly what she wanted, exactly when she wanted it. She clutched a manila folder stuffed with papers she'd printed from internet legal forums, her manicured nails tapping against the podium's edge, her lips pursed in that particular expression of righteous indignation that had terrified countless retail managers and HOA board members. But what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known as she prepared to launch her constitutional attack, was that hidden beneath Judge Judy's bench, marked with yellow sticky notes and highlighted passages, sat a document that would expose not just her ignorance, but something far more damaging, something that would make this case explode across every social media platform within hours. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Spectators pressed shoulder to shoulder, their phones already recording despite the bailiff's warnings, sensing with that primal instinct that humans have for impending disaster, that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Judge Judy's eyes, sharp as broken glass behind her signature frames, swept across the courtroom with the practiced assessment of a woman who'd presided over more than 20,000 cases, who'd seen every con, every lie, every desperate attempt to manipulate the system, and who had absolutely zero patience left for people who confused Google searches with legal education. The defendant sat trembling, already vindicated by the energy in the room, while Karen stood tall, believing with every fiber of her entitled being that she was about to school a television judge on the United States Constitution, that she was about to become a viral hero for standing up to judicial tyranny. She had no idea she was about to become a cautionary tale, a meme, a lesson in what happens when confidence meets actual expertise. The cameras zoomed in as Judge Judy leaned forward, and Karen opened her mouth to speak the words that would seal her fate. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Karen's voice cut through the courtroom like a siren, sharp and unwavering, carrying the kind of conviction that comes not from knowledge but from the dangerous certainty of someone who'd spent 3 hours on legal websites the night before. Your Honor, she began, her tone dripping with practiced condescension. Before we even begin to discuss the merits of this case, I need to address something far more serious. She paused for effect, letting her words hang in the air like a prosecutor about to reveal a smoking gun, her eyes scanning the gallery as if rallying support from an audience she believed was on her side. Judge Judy said nothing, her expression unreadable, her hand still resting on that mysterious leather-bound book, but her silence only emboldened Karen, who mistook patience for weakness, stillness for uncertainty. This entire proceeding, Karen continued, her voice rising with theatrical indignation, is unconstitutional. The word landed like a grenade in the middle of the courtroom, and the reaction was immediate. Gasps rippled through the gallery, spectators leaning forward in their seats, phones rising despite the bailiff's glare, camera operators adjusting their angles to capture what they sensed would be the money shot. The defendant's eyes went wide, his lawyer's pen freezing mid-note, and even the court reporter looked up from her machine, fingers hovering over the keys. Karen savored the moment, letting it breathe, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth as she surveyed the impact of her declaration. She'd practiced this, rehearsed it in front of her bathroom mirror, imagined the applause, the vindication, the interview requests that would surely follow. You see, Karen pressed on, her confidence swelling with each word. I've done my research, extensive research, and what I've discovered is that my constitutional rights are being violated in this courtroom. She waved her manila folder like a battle flag, papers rustling with the weight of her certainty. The Fifth Amendment protects me from being compelled to testify against myself. The Sixth Amendment guarantees me a trial by jury. The Seventh Amendment ensures my right to due process, and yet here I am, forced into this arbitration without any of those protections. Her voice had reached a crescendo, each amendment pronounced with the gravity of someone unveiling ancient secrets, her finger jabbing the air for emphasis. The gallery murmured, some nodding uncertainly, others exchanging skeptical glances, but Karen was on a roll now, unstoppable, intoxicated by her own rhetoric. The Founding Fathers, she declared, her hand pressed dramatically to her chest, wrote the Constitution to protect citizens like me from exactly this kind of judicial overreach. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, they would be appalled at what's happening in this room right now. Judge Judy remained motionless, a statue carved from pure judicial authority, her face betraying nothing but those who knew her, the producers who'd worked with her for decades, the bailiff who'd stood by her side through thousands of cases. They recognized the signs, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers stopped their drumming and went completely still on that leather book. A storm was brewing, but Karen, blinded by her own performance, couldn't see the clouds gathering. "I have rights, Your Honor," Karen continued, pulling papers from her folder with flourish, holding them up as if they were sacred texts. "I've consulted with legal experts. I've read the case law, I've studied the precedents, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that forcing me into this arbitration, denying me a proper jury trial, refusing me the constitutional protections that every American deserves, this is nothing less than a violation of everything this country stands for." She slammed her folder down on the podium, the sharp crack echoing through the chamber like a gavel, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "And quite frankly, Your Honor, I'm shocked that a court, even a television court, would allow such blatant constitutional violations to occur. It's illegal. It's unethical. It's un-American." The courtroom held its collective breath. The silence that followed Karen's tirade, so profound you could hear the hum of the overhead lights, the soft whir of the cameras, the rapid beating of hearts. Karen stood tall, chest heaving slightly from the exertion of her speech, arms crossed in a posture of defiant satisfaction, absolutely certain she'd just delivered a knockout blow. She'd said the magic words, invoked the sacred Constitution, challenged the very legitimacy of the proceedings. Surely now, Judge Judy would have to acknowledge the validity of her concerns, would have to dismiss the case, would have to admit that Karen had outmaneuvered her with superior legal knowledge. A few spectators actually nodded, swept up in the passion of her delivery, while others watched Judge Judy waiting, knowing that the real show was about to begin. Karen's smile widened slightly, interpreting the silence as victory, as vindication, as proof that even Judge Judy Sheindlin, the infamous television judge with her reputation for verbal destruction, had finally met her match in someone who knew the law, who understood the Constitution, who couldn't be intimidated or silenced. She had absolutely no idea that in the next 8 minutes, that smile would be wiped from her face, that her research would be exposed as worthless, and that the leather-bound book under Judge Judy's hand was about to become the instrument of her complete and utter humiliation. Judge Judy's hand moved with deliberate slowness, her fingers wrapping around the leather-bound book as she lifted it from the bench, the embossed gold lettering catching the courtroom lights, revealing what anyone paying attention could now see, was a pristine copy of the United States Constitution, its pages marked with colored tabs, its spine creased from years of actual use. Not the kind of prop you order online, but the kind of tool a real legal mind consults daily. The courtroom's energy shifted instantly, the air growing heavier, thicker, as Judge Judy opened the book to a page she didn't need to search for, her eyes scanning words she'd long ago committed to memory, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low, controlled, carrying the weight of 5 decades in courtrooms where constitutional law wasn't a talking point, but a living, breathing framework she'd sworn to uphold. "Ms. Mitchell," she began, and the formal use of Karen's last name sent a chill through the gallery. "I appreciate your passion, truly I do. But let me share something with you about this Constitution you're so fond of quoting." She held up the book, not theatrically, not for show, but with the reverence of someone who understood its actual significance. Article 3, Section 2 states, and I quote, "The judicial power shall extend to all cases, in law and equity, arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States and treaties made or which shall be made, under their authority." Her voice was steady, each word enunciated with precision, and Karen's smile began to falter just slightly. "At the edges now," Judge Judy continued, closing the book but keeping her finger marking the page. "You mentioned the 5th, 6th, and 7th Amendments, so let's talk about what they actually say, not what you think they say." She leaned back in her chair, her posture radiating the confidence of someone who'd forgotten more about constitutional law than Karen had ever learned. "The 5th Amendment protects you from self-incrimination in criminal proceedings. This is a civil contract dispute. The 6th Amendment guarantees you a speedy trial by jury in criminal prosecutions. Again, civil case. The 7th Amendment preserves the right to a jury trial in common law cases exceeding $20 in value. But here's what you missed in your extensive research." Judge Judy's voice took on an edge now, sharp enough to cut through Karen's manufactured confidence. "When you signed the agreement to appear on this show, when you put your signature on that contract with the production company, you knowingly and voluntarily waived your right to a traditional civil trial and agreed to binding arbitration. That's not unconstitutional, Ms. Mitchell. That's called contract law. And it's been upheld by the Supreme Court repeatedly. most notably in AT&T Mobility versus Conception in 2011. The gallery erupted in whispers, spectators exchanging glances, some pulling out phones to Google the case Judge Judy had just cited, while Karen's face drained of color, her manila folder suddenly feeling very light, very inadequate in her trembling hands. Judge Judy wasn't done. Her eyes locked on Karen with the intensity of a prosecutor closing in for the kill. You want to talk about the Founding Fathers? Let's talk about them. Karen's face flushed crimson, a deep red that spread from her neck upward, visible even under the courtroom's harsh lighting. And instead of retreating, instead of accepting that she'd been outmaneuvered by someone who actually understood the law, she doubled down with the desperate ferocity of someone whose entire identity was wrapped up in never, ever being wrong. With all due respect, Your Honor, she said, the phrase dripping with anything but respect. I think you're deliberately misinterpreting what I'm saying, because you don't want to admit that this show operates outside the bounds of legitimate legal proceedings. The gallery gasped at the audacity, at the sheer recklessness of accusing Judge Judy Shendlin of deliberately misinterpreting the Constitution, and even the defendant's lawyer sat up straighter, sensing they were witnessing something rare, something spectacular, the kind of courtroom suicide that would be talked about for years. Karen yanked more papers from her folder, her hands shaking now not with nervousness but with indignant rage. I have articles here from constitutional scholars, real experts who explain how binding arbitration is actually a violation of our fundamental rights as Americans, how corporations use it to deny citizens their day in court, how it's a loophole that the Founding Fathers never intended. Her voice was rising again, louder now, more shrill, the desperation leaking through despite her attempts to sound authoritative. Judge Judy's expression hardened, the educational patience evaporating, replaced by something colder, more dangerous, the look of a woman who'd been insulted one too many times by people who confused confidence with competence. Ms. Mitchell, she said, her voice dropping to that deadly quiet register that anyone who'd watched her show knew meant someone was about to be annihilated. Let me be crystal clear with you. I was a family court judge in Manhattan for 25 years before I ever stepped foot in a television studio. I've presided over more than 20,000 cases. I've written books on the law. I've taught at law schools. And you're standing there with your Google printouts telling me I don't understand the Constitution. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade, and Karen, sensing she was losing ground but unable to stop herself, made the fatal mistake of going personal. Maybe that's the problem, she snapped, her judgment completely abandoning her. Maybe all those years on a TV show have made you forget what real law looks like. This isn't justice, it's entertainment, and you're using your platform to deny people their constitutional rights while cameras roll. The courtroom exploded in murmurs, shocked gasps, and one voice from the gallery muttering, "Oh, she's done," loud enough for the microphones to catch. Judge Judy stood up, a rare move that sent a visible shockwave through the courtroom, her full height somehow seeming taller than her physical 5'1" frame, her presence expanding to fill every corner of the room. "We're done playing games," she said quietly, reaching for something beneath her bench. "Let me show you exactly what the Constitution says about people like you." Judge Judy pulled out a document from beneath her bench. Not the Constitution this time, but something else. Something that made Karen's eyes widen with sudden recognition and dawning horror. A single sheet of paper bearing Karen's own signature. The contract she'd signed with the show's production company. And Judge Judy held it up like a prosecutor presenting murder weapon evidence to a jury. "This is your signature, correct, Ms. Mitchell?" she asked, her voice carrying the precision of a scalpel. Karen nodded weakly, her bravado crumbling, and Judge Judy began reading aloud, her voice clear and unwavering. "I hereby acknowledge that I am voluntarily submitting my case to binding arbitration presided over by Judge Judith Scheindlin, and I understand that her decision is final and legally binding, and I waive my right to pursue this matter in any other court or jurisdiction." She lowered the paper, her eyes boring into Karen with laser focus. "You signed this 3 weeks ago. Your signature is notarized. You were given 72 hours to review it with an attorney if you chose. Did you read it, Ms. Mitchell?" Karen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, and Judge Judy pressed forward, opening the Constitution again to a page marked with a blue tab. "Let me educate you on what the Founding Fathers actually intended, since you invoked their names. Article 1. Section 10 states that no state shall pass any law impairing the obligation of contracts. The Contracts Clause. You made an agreement. You signed a binding contract. The Constitution protects that contract, it doesn't void it because you're having buyer's remorse." The courtroom was absolutely silent now, every eye fixed on Judge Judy as she moved through the Constitution with surgical precision, her decades of experience evident in every word. "The Seventh Amendment, which you love quoting, has been interpreted by the Supreme Court in cases like Shearson versus McMahon, Doctors Associates versus Casarato, and most recently Epic Systems versus Lewis, all of which upheld the validity of arbitration agreements. She wasn't reading from notes, wasn't checking references, the case names flowing from her memory like water from a tap, each citation a hammer blow to Karen's crumbling argument. You want to know what's unconstitutional, Ms. Mitchell? I'll tell you. What's unconstitutional is you wasting this court's time with frivolous arguments designed to avoid accountability for a contract dispute. You're going to lose on the merits. Judge Judy's voice rose now, not in anger but in the powerful crescendo of someone delivering an undeniable truth. The Founding Fathers created a system of law built on contracts, on agreements between parties, on personal responsibility. They didn't create a system where you get to sign documents and then cry, unconstitutional, when those documents don't work in your favor. She closed the Constitution with a definitive snap that echoed through the chamber. Your constitutional argument is denied. It's baseless, it's frivolous, and quite frankly, it's insulting to everyone who actually understands what this document represents. Now, shall we discuss the actual case, or would you like to continue embarrassing yourself? Karen stood frozen at the podium, her carefully constructed facade shattered into 1,000 pieces, her manila folder hanging limply in her hands. The papers that had seemed so authoritative just minutes ago now revealed as nothing more than worthless printouts from legal discussion, forums where anonymous users shared half-understood concepts they'd picked up from crime dramas. The gallery was electric with energy, spectators whispering furiously to one another, phones buzzing with texts and social media posts already going viral, hashtags forming in real time as the clip spread across Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Reddit threads exploding with titles like, Judge Judy absolutely destroys Karen with constitutional knowledge, and never bring Google to a real judge fight. The defendant sat back in his chair, a smile of pure relief spreading across his face, knowing that whatever happened next, he'd already won simply by watching Karen's constitutional house of cards collapse under the weight of actual legal expertise. Judge Judy settled back into her seat, her expression softening slightly from prosecutorial intensity to something more educational, more measured, the look of a teacher who'd just delivered a harsh but necessary lesson to a student who'd grown too confident in their own ignorance. Let me explain something to everyone watching, Judge Judy said, addressing not just Karen but the cameras, the gallery, the millions who would eventually see this moment, because this is important and it goes far beyond this case. She paused, letting her words settle, her hands folded calmly on the bench. We live in an age where information is everywhere, where anyone can Google "is this unconstitutional?" and find 1,000 opinions, 1,000 interpretations, 1,000 people who sound very confident about things they don't actually understand. But the Constitution isn't a Wikipedia article. It's not a Reddit thread. It's not something you can master in a 3-hour late-night research session before you walk into a courtroom. The gallery nodded, some members leaning forward captivated by the shift from confrontation to education. The Constitution is a living framework that's been interpreted, debated, and refined by brilliant legal minds for over 200 years. Supreme Court justices spend their entire careers studying its nuances. Constitutional scholars dedicate decades to understanding a single amendment. And yes, ordinary citizens should know their rights, should understand the basics, should be informed and engaged. But there's a difference between being informed and pretending to be an expert. Judge Judy's eyes found Karen again, not with cruelty, but with something closer to pity. You could have walked in here today, presented your case on its actual merits, and we would have had a fair hearing. But instead you chose to hide behind constitutional buzzwords, to throw around amendments you don't understand, to waste everyone's time with legal theater. She gestured to the contract still sitting on her bench. And in doing so, you didn't just lose your case. You became a cautionary tale about what happens when ego outpaces knowledge, when confidence masquerades as competence, when someone mistakes the ability to sound smart for actually being smart. The courtroom had transformed from a battlefield into a classroom, the tension replaced by something deeper, more profound, the kind of collective understanding that comes when truth cuts through noise and everyone present recognizes they've witnessed not just a legal victory, but a cultural moment that transcends the case itself. Judge Judy leaned forward one final time, her voice carrying the weight of 50 years in the legal system, 50 years of fighting for justice, 50 years of watching people try to game a system designed to protect them. Here's what I want everyone to take away from this, she said, her words measured and deliberate, each syllable landing with purpose. The law isn't your enemy. The Constitution isn't a weapon you deploy when you don't like how things are going. These are frameworks, protections, guidelines that generations of Americans have fought and died to preserve. They deserve respect, not manipulation. They deserve understanding, not exploitation. Karen's shoulders sagged, the fight completely drained from her body, tears welling in her eyes as the full weight of her humiliation settled over her like a heavy blanket. Judge Judy's expression softened slightly, not with pity but with the firm compassion of someone who knew that sometimes the hardest lessons are the most valuable ones. You walked in here thinking you could outsmart the system, that you could use big words and constitutional references to avoid accountability for a contract you violated. Judge Judy continued, her tone gentler now but no less firm. But the truth always wins, Ms. Mitchell, always. Not because I'm sitting on this bench, but because that's how the law works when it's applied correctly, fairly, and by people who actually understand it. She picked up her gavel, holding it suspended for a moment that stretched like eternity. Judgment for the defendant. Case dismissed. And Ms. Mitchell, I strongly suggest you spend less time on legal websites and more time honoring the agreements you make. The gavel came down with a crack that reverberated through the chamber, final and absolute. And the courtroom erupted not in applause but in the rustling movement of people processing what they'd witnessed, phones already glowing with video uploads, news alerts beginning to ping across the nation. Within hours, law professors would be emailing the clip to their students, civics teachers would be adding it to their curricula, and millions of Americans would watch as Judge Judy Sheindlin demonstrated what real constitutional knowledge looks like when wielded by someone who dedicated their entire life to upholding it. The lesson was simple, powerful and undeniable. Respect the law, understand what you're talking about, and never, ever try to fake expertise in front of someone who's earned theirs through decades of hard work. Because the truth doesn't care about your confidence, it only cares about being true.